Thank you everyone for being here today. I am so excited to have a conversation with you about DEIB culture and how we start with skills. So if you were thinking this is a sit back, relax, and listen kind of hour, please enjoy that, but that's not my intent for us. So we'll start using the chat. I'd love to have you warm up your fingers by telling me where you're dialing in from. And I will watch that as I continue on with my own introduction, and then we'll prepare for the program. Beautiful. Love it. Oh, Minneapolis, that's where I'm from as well. So by way of introduction, thank you. I do lead our product operations and innovation teams here at DEIB. I've been with DEIB for 6 years. And during those 6 years, I have had the opportunity to start up and launch and really grow one of our business resource groups, and it is our culture business resource group. So I come to you with that passion and focus as well. And I am super excited to, again, spend this hour with you. So I'm going to give you another task. If you are busy typing where you're from, keep doing that. If you can multitask or you've already introduced your location, I'd like you to visualize something. So close your eyes if you want. I can't see you. But visualize the last person you hired. And visualize what it was that first drew your attention to that person. What caught your eye? And then what was it about that person through the process that impressed you? I'll take us back on another little exercise. I love that folks are typing those answers in the chat. So eye contact, competency, confident, professional, action-oriented, smile, experience, passion, good. These are all good answers. What I'm not seeing or hearing yet is they came from the right company, or they went to the right school. Right? So not that there's anything wrong with those things, certainly we draw from experiences, but the whole premise of the hour that we're going to spend today is focusing on skills because, first of all, they are kind of the backbone, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but the second thing is that they're not biased, right? When we think about things like, where did somebody work or where did they get their education? Those things come with an inherent bias in them. And so when we think about really, truly bringing in a DE and IB culture into our organizations, we have to work to reduce bias. You all know that. And so skills are one way that we can do that. So thank you for going on that journey with me. Hopefully, as you go through this hour together, you can think about how it is that you're hiring people, promoting people, supporting people, engaging the people that you work with in your organization, using skills as that foundation. All right, so let's start this journey together. So why am I so focused on skills? Why are we so focused on skills? Well, we believe at DEIB that skills are the currency of work. What does that mean? Sounds like economics. It is economics, right? So currency is defined as something that you exchange or trade for something of value, right? Currency is something that you exchange or trade for something of value. And skills really are that backbone. It's what people do versus how a job is done, right? Skills are that piece, that driver that makes someone successful as opposed to what they accomplished in that job, right? The skills are those transferable currency that let you do one thing in one job, in one company, and maybe do something completely different in the next. I grew up in L&D, and I grew up doing all the roles in L&D. I was a trainer and an instructional designer and a project manager and a consultant, and then I pivoted to technology. And then I pivoted to DEIB. And at DEIB, I've been a consultant and a client support advocate, and now I lead product operations. And how did I make all those pivots? It's because of the skills, the currency that I traded for something of value. So skills are what's traded in organizations for compensation, for benefits, for career growth, for financial security, and all of those things that are some of the reasons why each of us work as employees within organizations. So that's the why. What is it that you actually need to trade in this economic system then? Well, you need to trade skills, and we break them down into 3 categories. So power skills are really, they're those skills that sometimes we call soft skills. They're the human and professional skills that really are durable over time, and they are applicable. They're used in most jobs. So in the chat, I would love to see some examples of power skills. Hopefully this is a softball question. Feedback. Yes. What else? Effective communication. Love that. What else? Emotional intelligence, critical thinking, dealing with ambiguity, influence computer. Yep. All of those. They're coming in. Yes. All right. You've got power skills. I love it. The next category, functional skills. Again, probably not news to you. Functional skills really are the subject matter expertise that are required to perform a specific job. They can be transferred to other jobs depending on the situation. So, examples of functional skills in the role that you're in or the roles that you support. I love these power skills: deductive reasoning, resolving conflicts, strategic design, moral support. Ooh, love that. MS Word, coder, learning design, yep, analysis, technical skills, bookkeeping, project management, report writing, Excel, yep, you've got this. So yes, those areas of subject matter expertise that allow someone to be successful in their specific function. Sometimes they can transfer, sometimes they can't, right? Product management was critical to me when I came to the product organization. I didn't need it in the past 20 years of my career. I needed things like project management, a little bit different. Okay, so we know power skills, we know functional skills. The third category we sometimes call transactional or hot skills. The reason for that is, these are the skills that are hot at any given time, right? That limited set of skills that are trending in the world, in the industry, et cetera. We call them transactional because they have a short shelf life, right? So they often are critical for a period of time, they burst, and then they no longer have as much value in the marketplace. What might be an example of a transactional skill? Social media, I see. Data science. I don't know if you were advanced answering my question. If you were, you're exactly right. those are in that category. Working with a specific CRM. Yeah, any kind of specific technology or coding language is likely a transactional skill or a hot skill because it's going to die just as quickly as it trended, right? Software analytics, maybe, yep, M&A depending on the function, right? So a specific merger acquisition, yes. The ability to execute or strategize around mergers and acquisitions might be more of a functional skill. So again, depending on where it is. Okay, so you all have this. You know how we categorize skills. So that's good news. So that's kind of laying the foundation. I'm curious now if we could start the poll. Curious in your organizations, which of these 3 categories shows up most often in your organization? What do you focus on? Is it power skills? Is it functional skills? Or is it transactional skills? And I am forcing a choice, but hopefully you can kind of think about what your current, maybe past few months and next few months look like and which of these categories you're focused on. And I know we're leaving the poll open for a bit of time. Hopefully this is an easy choice for you. And Catherine, you can, if you don't mind, just letting me know how much time we have left, and then I'm eager to see these results as well. Looks like we might have just a little bit more time in the response. Oh. I'm seeing the results. So functional skills, by far, is the area of focus among our audience members today. Not surprising. When you think about, needing to keep people upskilled for the jobs that they're doing so that the business can accomplish the goals that the business needs to accomplish. That's not surprising. Power skills are evergreen, so that coming in second. I'm a little surprised that the transactional skills being only 9% of the response. So maybe in chat, I would love to hear from those of you that did or didn't respond about transactional skills, why that may be lower. So that's your next task in chat, is tell me why you think transactional skills were a bit lower. As you do that, I guess I'm asking you to multitask at multiple points along our journey today. I know you're accomplished in that, so hopefully it's not too much of a challenge. So we've talked about what? The currency of skills. Or we've talked about kind of skills being the currency in that whole economic system. We've talked about what? The skills, right? We've talked about why. Now let's talk about how DEIB really supports the value equation. So value equation being that, how do I trade and receive value within my organization? So as an employee, no surprise, right? DEIB increases employee fulfillment, increases things like engagement and retention. These slides in this webinar is really based on a study that Degree did with Red Thread Research in 2021 that looked at DEIB and the skills necessary in order to create a DEIB culture within organizations. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that positive DEIB cultures increase engagement, fulfillment, retention. But we've got some additional data points that show just how strong that relationship is. We also, probably not a surprise to know that companies that have strong DEIB cultures also have higher levels of innovation and greater business performance. And then finally, consumers. We see it in the media. Consumers are voting with their feet or their dollars based on companies and how they react in the ecosystem and how they're promoting DEIB both internally but then also externally as well. I love the comments about transactional skills and the discussion that's going on there, so please continue to do that. So, it's really about being more competitive in the marketplace, and this comes from a McKinsey study from 2020 that said diverse teams are more innovative, they're stronger at anticipating shifts in consumer needs and consumption patterns that make new products and services possible, potentially generating a competitive edge. And that certainly is consistent with the research study that, again, we sponsored with Red Thread Research. We also found in our research study that organizations that have a strong DEIB culture have higher NPS scores, so employees be likely to recommend their company as a place to work. And we saw that correlation over the last 3 years. Additionally, companies that were high on the DEIB index that came out of this study had a higher perception of managerial effectiveness, as well as we saw a correlation in employees' engagement and their intent to stay in the organization. So good confirmation of what McKinsey is saying in their study from 2020 as well. So why is DEIB so important? Again, it's about doing better, to be better, to live better, with skills at the center of that. So the 4 categories that we look at, cultural impact, right? So again, that positive impact on the employee experience that's causing them to give us those higher NPS scores, that's causing them to respond that they're more likely to stay. It's causing them to say their managers are more effective in the organization without having to do extensive manager training or change anything else about the manager employee experience. DEIB is lifting the tide as it relates to employees' perceptions of their managers. We spoke about the social impact. Again, companies who are responding in meaningful ways and impactful ways to what's going on in the world around us are seeing stronger support from consumers, from their organizational partners as well. Additionally, as we think about the response internally, Organizations that have strong DEIB cultures seem to address the mental health and wellness issues that we saw arise over the last couple of years as we went through the experience of the pandemic. And so the support, the structures that are in place to address those issues for inside of the organization so that employees and their families can have better experiences outside of the organization has been a positive impact as well. We've spoken about innovation. It'll be a common thread throughout these slides. The short story is organizations with strong DEIB cultures are just more innovative. They've got diversity of thought, which allows them to get to solutions quicker and in more impactful ways, and bring those solutions to market. And then finally, because of all of those things, organizations are seeing real business impact. They're growing market share and profits. And they're able to embrace and use a diverse workforce to deliver that value and accelerate growth. So, continuing on, if that's where we want to be, and those are all the conditions and that need to be in place, the what, the why, the how, let's take a look at the current state. So, not to be incredibly doom and gloom, but what we've done in the past isn't working. So I think what we've seen happen in the past is that organizations focus on symptoms, not necessarily the root causes. So what are the symptoms of a lack of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging inside of our organizations versus what are the systemic issues, the root causes that are not allowing us to be better. That's one element of the current state. Secondly, employee resource groups or business resource groups aren't enough. They just aren't enough. And I say that having shared with you that I launched and grew our Culture BRG here at DEIB. And I know it's not enough, right? It's a great first step. So if you're supporting BRGs and ERGs within your organization, keep doing it. Just don't stop there, right? Work to empower your ERGs and BRGs because those are people who have passion, and we'll talk about why that's so important as one of the skills. But don't stop there. Same thing with training. If you're offering training, if you're talking about and educating your workforce on unconscious bias or inclusive practices, keep doing those things, but don't stop. Don't stop there, right? So training, as we all know, is a step along the journey. The real benefit happens when those things get infused into the way of life, when they're changing behaviors and practices and systems inside of the organization. And then finally, point-in-time events don't drive sustainable change. So if you're doing them, don't stop. Just don't stop there, right? So all of these things are what we're seeing as trending inside of organizations that are good, but not great. So how do we get to better? Here's what the research said. So if we look at kind of four main constituencies and what they expect as it relates to DEIB efforts, the market itself is shifting expectations. We've spoken about this already. That consumers want brands to weigh in and to make meaningful progress, impact on society's problems, right? Again, over the last couple of years, we've seen this, right? And we've seen kind of the true impact when organizations are committed to creating social change. Employees want employers to have ethics and values. It shouldn't be a surprise. Maybe what's shocking about the statistic is that it's so low, 41%, right? But more and more, as you think about that person that you hired, did ethics and values come up in the conversation? Were there conversations about what your organizational culture was like? I bet there were, right? I bet that was part of the conversation that you led or that the interviewee led with you as they were exploring whether or not your organization was the right place for them to join. And hopefully they found that to be a positive response. Consumers on the bottom right, 64% of consumers want companies to set an example of diversity within their orgs and to be able to demonstrate that. And then finally, 81% of employees believe employers should reiterate zero tolerance for discrimination and harassment, right? So again, employees are looking for us as leaders within the organizations to drive this. So from a business perspective, the research saw a 2x increase in employees in companies that indicated they were likely to meet their business goals for the last 3 years. Sorry, that statement was hard for me to say. So 2 times increase of meeting business goals for organizations that have strong DEIB cultures. They also have higher customer satisfaction. 81% of organizations with strong DEIB cultures have higher customer satisfaction, and 72% are more likely to indicate their organization is innovative. Again, there's that theme again, right? We see the innovation coming through from the diversity of thought and the ability, when those voices are able to be heard quickly, to come to the right solution and bring that to market. And then finally, 43% more likely to indicate their org will meet their 2021 business goals. Again, the survey was from 2021, so an indicator of the current state and the success that was expected coming out of this. Thinking about culture. So in top DEIB orgs, those with a positive culture, employees were 2 times more likely to give their employer a positive net promoter score. Again, that question of how likely are you to recommend this company to a friend. Employees 45% more likely to have high intent to stay. That's the engagement retention statistic that we talked about, and 2 times more likely to indicate that they met business goals for the last 3 years in their organizations. So again, there is a real impact both on employees, how they're feeling about the organization, and therefore the organization's ability to meet its goals and outcomes. This audience might be surprising to you. So, as we think about the business environment, and we think about the growth of startups, and we think about, the growth of investors as well, we wanted to look at how investor expectations might relate to the prevalence of a DEIB culture, a strong DEIB culture inside of an organization. And it's no surprise that it's becoming increasingly important. In fact, 65% of investment professionals cite investor demands as the second biggest motivator for considering ESG factors in their investment analysis. So, investors are looking for companies, or looking at a company's record related to DEIB as they're making their investment decisions. And so again, for companies that publish formal ESG reports, for startup companies that are looking for funding, this ability to demonstrate strong DEIB culture is becoming increasingly important towards really companies' survival or their reputation in the economy. And so the result of all of that is that the C-suite and boards really are prioritizing DEIB efforts. Hopefully you are nodding along that that's true in your organization as well, that you're seeing that support directly from the top. We see executives more open to DEIB topics and telling their own stories inside of the organization, expressing vulnerability related to these topics so that the organization at large can learn from and progress forward with these efforts. We're seeing more honest conversations on topics throughout the organization, no longer just kind of the face that organizations want to show, but again, that vulnerability, that true, honest, sometimes gritty dialogue that needs to happen in order for change to progress. And we'll look at skills that it takes to have that dialogue as well. And then again, we're seeing expansion of DEIB efforts. So when I proclaimed that doom and gloom slide and all those efforts that are not quite enough, again, if you're doing them, don't stop. Just don't stop there, right? And that's really what this is saying, is don't stop there. see what else you can do to draw in some of these matters. And so I started out by saying skills are the currency of work. Started out by saying we trade them in an economy. We appropriately talked about power skills, functional skills, transactional skills. We understood those concepts. So really now it's time to say, from the research, what are the skills that matter most? You may be here for the 2 critical skills, and I promise I'm going to share those with you as well. And so really we took a deep dive into what are the skills that are needed in order for organizations, individuals, employees at every level to drive a successful, positive DEIB culture within the organization. Here's the thing. Action skills, we found, were much more important than passive skills. So what do we mean by that? Action skills, things like assertiveness, challenging the status quo, calculated risk-taking, pattern recognition is one of my favorites on this slide, mental flexibility, right? So those things that are really action-oriented as opposed to more passive skills like listening or empathy or self-awareness. Not that those things are bad, they're not, but they're not enough in order to drive a positive change in your DEIB culture. In fact, our research said that when organizations only focus on those passive skills, there's actually a negative correlation with being a top DEIB org. However, when passive skills really augment the active skills that we're seeing on most of this slide, the orgs are more likely to be a top DEIB org. And those 2 skills, they're in yellow with that nice yellow circle around them. So the 2 skills that were especially important as we looked across organizations, across roles, calculated risk-taking and nonverbal communication. Let's pause on that for a moment. What happened in 2020 to nonverbal communication? It changed, right? For many organizations, nonverbal communication changed because no longer can you see all of my the ways I'm nonverbally communicating, but you're limited to this little square that you can see. Once in a while, my hands appear, and you can see a little bit more of nonverbal communication, but it changed, right? And so we have to think about things like nonverbal communication. How is tone coming through when we're chatting with somebody? Nonverbal communication. How am I coming through when I am in this little box on the screen, right? What am I doing to be engaging in nonverbal ways so that you can hear beyond the words that I'm saying what my message is? Nonverbal communication. How do we show up when we're on these video chats, right? Do we show up with camera on because we know how important it is for people to see us? So, again, calculated risk-taking is the other big one. So calculated risk-taking, really being thoughtful about driving forward, but making sure that you're driving forward, right? Taking action in meaningful ways, taking risks, being vulnerable. Those 2 skills, again, across levels in the organization, and we're going to take a deep dive in a moment, those 2 showed up as being the most critical. Before I move off this slide, again, notice all of the action words here. Notice pattern recognition was the other one I called out. It's one of my favorites because I think, for years we talked about things like data analysis. Data analysis is important, but it's passive, right? Pattern recognition is active. They're kind of the same thing, right? So data analysis is recognizing patterns and trends, but think about how those words just change the energy around it, right? And so as you think about the way that you talk about skills within your organization, and particularly those that support your DEIB culture, see if you can change the language that you're using to make it more active. Again, passive skills are important to support, but it's those action-oriented skills that are really going to get people energized and committed to driving positive change for you. Okay, let's deep dive into the various roles. So if you are a leader, a manager, an individual within the organization, or you support any of those, we've got specific data suggestions, specific skill suggestions for how you drive forward. So if you are an HR professional supporting all three of these, in the takeaway slides, I'll give you just a summary of these items. But for leaders, so leaders, we're talking about our executive audiences and our senior leaders within an organization. And, you know, it's true of almost every part of their job, part of our jobs as senior leaders. It's about driving and driving at scale. It's about pushing for change. And so it's probably not surprising that the skills that showed up as top skills for this role, challenging the status quo, assertiveness, mental flexibility, right? Because it's really about understanding various perspectives, assimilating them, and then being willing to be vulnerable, take those calculated risks to challenge the status quo. Leaders drive change at scale. And so understanding, taking action, being open to various perspectives. Nonverbal communication shows up here, right? Actions speak louder than words. Again, as leaders, when we're having those tough conversations about DEIB in the organization, how do you show up? Do you show up on video? Do you show up present? Do you show up active in the conversation? Those are ways that nonverbal communication can drive success in this role. And then, of course, being socially savvy. So persuasion, calculated risk-taking, knowing when to push for change, knowing when your efforts to drive forward really are going to have the best impact for you and for your business. Managers are in the middle. So for managers, it's really about setting the conditions, right? So understanding the strategy from the top, being able to empower the individuals that work for us as managers. So again, we see being open to new ideas. Curiosity shows up as a critical skill here. So again, it's important to understand different perspectives, knowing that managers are in the middle. So being able to translate the strategic thinking and vision that is generated from our executives and leaders at the top and make that actionable for our frontline employees and the individuals who work on our teams, who need to be able to translate those into actions that they can take on a daily basis in their work. Driving and monitoring change. So again, challenging the status quo shows up, but we see grit, right? So grit being that perseverance, that resiliency, that driving forward even when things are hard, right? Even when, as managers in the middle, we have tough conversations at both levels, right? Tough conversations with individuals who want to see change and want to be part of the change, as well as from the executives who want to see the impact, want to see those outcomes that we talked about earlier. So again, grit in being able to navigate all of those conversations. Influence and negotiation skills show up here as well, right? And kind of that personalized influence and negotiation as we think about those two audience groups, but as we think about really empowering individuals to be the drivers of change. And then we talked about navigating social complexity, right? So again, that persuasion, that influence, calculated risk-taking, and nonverbal communication show up here as well. Again, those are the two critical skills across roles that really are meaningful and necessary in order to be able to improve the DEIB culture. So finally, let's look at the role of individuals. So individuals really are the catalyst for change, right? So by sheer math, there are more workers in almost every organization than there are managers and executives. So if we want to make meaningful change, by sheer math, we have to empower the individuals, right? We have to give them the tools and harness their passion to be able to drive change. And so for individuals, it's about putting skin in the game. It's about showing up authentically and having the courage, having the environmental conditions to be able to display courage, to be the change that individuals want to see within the organization. It's about genuinely influencing others. So again, by virtue of organizational structure, the individuals have to use their influencing skills, both to get others on board, but also to have their voices heard by the managers and by the executives within the org. That involves calculated risk taking, right? It involves knowing when to speak up and knowing which efforts, which topics are the most important to keep pushing on. I work with a woman who calls herself a positive disruptor. She happens to be one of the sponsors of one of the other business resource groups we have within Degreed, and she is the person who is empowering them to do things differently, to think about things differently, to push all of us to make change, right? So again, having a person like that in your corner as an individual is really important to support that calculated risk taking. And so again, as HR professionals, as managers and leaders ourselves, thinking about being that person for your employees, but also identifying who else can be those people who will empower individuals so that they can empower each other to drive change. And then individuals really need to help design the new future. They need to think about what do they want it to be. Here's where pattern recognition comes into play, as well as managing ambiguity. Ooh, why is this important? Well, sometimes change takes a long time. And sometimes when we're in that process of change, things can feel kind of unclear or ambiguous. And so for individuals to continue to drive forward, they need to have the skill to be able to manage through that ambiguity. And then we see data literacy showing up as well, because we need to be able to understand what's happening in order to be able to, at scale, turn the ship, right? Understand what actions we need to take next. And so I'm curious, as you think about where you're focusing your DEIB efforts, and again, I'm going to force a choice, on which audience are you most focused? Is it your leaders, your senior leaders and executives? Is it on your managers, those employees in the middle? Is it on the individuals, the groundswell of employees, or are you focused on all? I do give you an option to select all in this case. Where do you make your investment of time? Where do you make your investment of effort across these audiences? It looks like my poll is closing. I should have the results here shortly. I'm eagerly anticipating them. You surprised me in the last poll, so I'm curious how this one will show too. Surprising me is a good thing. Keeps me awake and active. Okay, lots of you chose all. So 55% choosing all. Besides that pretty even split between leaders, managers, and individuals. Fair enough, fair enough. I'm curious in chat, I haven't asked you a question in a while, haven't asked you to multitask in a while. So in chat, as you had responded to that, whether it was all or one of the other three choices, tell us about your favorite program or your favorite effort that has driven positive change in your organization. So what is it that you did that drove positive change? I see none of the above. That's interesting, Jocelyn. Maybe you could tell us more about that as well. Bruce says engaging informal leaders. Yeah, right. That's that empowering the individuals, but also the manager population as well. Again, it's not about organizational hierarchy. It's about harnessing that power, right? Or harnessing that passion as well to drive those people forward. So it's not about the organizational relationship. It's about who can drive change, who has the skills to drive change. Established an ERG and DEI council with executive sponsorship, toolkits, love that. Survey, training, town halls, like that. Yeah, stakeholder engagement, power interest, courageous conversations. Ooh, nice. So many. I love that, Eric. Ally program coaching, great, excellent. I could get caught up in the chat. Let me share our last few little bits of wisdom, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And I'm going to scroll back through the chat as well. Book club. Ooh, interesting. I wonder what you're reading, Eleanor. How do you take action? So how do you drive this forward? So we got to do it, right? Probably not a surprise. Organizations must take steps now to continue to strengthen diversity and build inclusive cultures in ways unlike ever before. So hopefully the responses that you're seeing in chat, as well as some of the skills that we've talked about already, are giving you some ideas. Let's talk about how to develop the skills, right? So Degreed has a platform to build and develop skills, but here's really kind of the process behind it, right? Everything starts with business strategy, right? So you know this, you're HR executives, right? You know that the linkage to the business strategy is so important. It's really critical when we think about DEIB to create that thread, to tie it all the way back to business strategy. So our goal as a business is to do X, and so DEIB supports it in this way because, right? So to create that linkage back. The second thing we talk about is looking at your norms and practices, because your norms and practices are those behaviors. It's also a bit of a proxy for skills, right? But we're also talking about kind of what is allowed within your organization, what is accepted within your organization, what is recognized within your organization, and what is not, right? What is the opposite of all of those statements? Because we know that norms and practices is the behavior change is where we see business outcome impact. Decency and accountability is really, again, what is acceptable? What's allowable? What do you see going on in norms and practices that might not be so positive that you need to examine and change, right? So that you are always exhibiting the highest degree of accountability, the highest degree of decency. Yeah, the unwritten rules, Jan, you're right. Social intelligence, right? So we spoke earlier about the social impact. Social intelligence is really kind of what's happening inside of your organization at the water cooler, at the places that people interact. What can you learn from that? Inclusive skill development, number 5, is so important, right? One of the reasons why I asked the poll question earlier, on which audience do you focus? And one of the reasons why I'm delighted that it's all, or that all showed up so highly, is that we need to think about inclusive skill development, right? So it's not to say that leadership development programs are bad. They're not. It's not to say that DE&IB events are bad. They're not. But when you think about who has the ability to attend those things, is it geographically possible if it's an on-site event? Is it functionally possible if there is a budget requirement or an approval requirement or a level requirement in order to be part of those programs? Is it inclusive from a time zone perspective? For global organizations, this is a real thing, right? If conversations, if recognition happens in synchronous ways, like we're doing today, a webinar that we are all gathered in the same place, that's great. And there are parts of the globe that can't participate. So how do you create different experiences for your global audiences that are equivalent to the synchronous experiences that others create? So examining those practices, who gets skill development and why, and how do you expand the capability in equivalent ways when there are limitations? So again, it's not bad Just think about how you can become more inclusive in the skill development that you're offering. And then finally, we have to measure, right? We have to have data on what's actually happening with regards to skills. How do we do that? Well, we start by measuring what skills are important in our organization, identifying those, and measuring the skill capabilities that we have, taking an honest look at skill capabilities, all the way back to that visualization exercise. When you visualized the last person you hired and what caught your attention, and what led you to progress through the conversations ultimately to hire that person. And many of you in the chat listed skills, right? Or you listed characteristics in some cases. That's the step, right? Identify what it is that you want to hire for, and then measure those things. That's what you did in that evaluation process. You identified, you measured the person against those skills or characteristics, and you ultimately made a hiring decision based on it. Do that in everything that you do, right? Identify the skills that are really critical for your business strategy, for driving DE&IB forward. Again, we gave you some calculated risk-taking and nonverbal communication are the two critical skills. So those two should show up. Identify a few more that surround those two that are really critical for you, and then measure the level of capability within your organization. Roll out some programs, make some effort to increase the skill level across your business, and then measure again, and then do more, and then measure again, and then do more, and then reevaluate back to your business strategy. Are you still aligned? Have your norms and practices changed? Are you increasing the level of decency and accountability within your culture? How do you harness social intelligence? And again, what's changed about the inclusive skill development? So although this looks like a linear process, it's really circular, right? It's something that you do over and over and over again in order to drive change. It's important that all of us play the role. So again, if for your senior leaders that you support, it's about driving and driving at scale. For managers, it's about setting the conditions. Again, that middle layer, able to speak the language of the executives as well as the individual. Individuals, catalysts for change. Someone mentioned informal leaders in the organization. I love that, right? All of our individuals should be empowered to be informal leaders in the organization. And then those of us who are HR and DE and IB leaders, provide the insights, provide the data, go through that cycle of building and measuring skills, and then provide that data so that everyone inside of your business can understand what's going on and how to change. So here are our key takeaways. We have talked about how DE&IB matters to employees in terms of fulfillment and engagement and retention, how it matters to businesses in terms of innovation and the ability to meet business outcomes, and how it matters to consumers in the way that they continue to consume, to buy our products and services from our businesses. And so what are the key takeaways? First, think differently, right? Again, what we've done in the past isn't enough to drive forward. So we need to think differently about what we can do. Address the root cause and not the symptoms, right? So it's easy to look at the symptoms, but to truly drive change, to have that positive impact on your culture, you have to look at the root cause. Align DE&IB business and people strategies together, right? DE&IB is a business strategy. So while it is often executed by a people function within many organizations, there has to be that support, that sponsorship driven at a business level in order for employees to understand that it truly is part of the culture, part of the fabric that is woven into the business. Create the conditions, right? So create the environment where your employees can have these vulnerable conversations, can drive their passion to move forward. Again, by simple math, if we empower the individuals, we're going to see change. Use skills as the currency. So that is a big message, but as it relates to DEIB culture, drive those action skills, right? Identify those action skills and use them as the way that you measure and drive progress. They're not biased. Skills are not biased. So use them for your talent decision, not just opinions, not reactions. Skills really are that currency, and your skills needs will change. One of the reasons we talked about the power of the functional and the transactional skills is those transactional skills do have a shelf life. So if you're using the same skills to hire today as you were 5 years ago, you're probably a little bit inaccurate. So evaluating the skills that really are needed to drive your business forward at this moment in time is really critical. Empower employees, I think we've got that. Be data driven, right? So it's not just about opinions or stories. Those are so valuable and powerful, but it's about the data as well. So measure your progress so that you can drive accountability, and then do it all together, right? Again, one of the reasons why BRGs grew up in organizations is that it was a way to give people a common cause. And so find those additional ways to give people a common cause, to give them a sense of community as we are all driving towards change. So with that, we have just a few minutes for questions. I see a couple that have come in. If you are in chat, if I could ask you to open up your Q&A window and type any questions in there. I know there were a couple that came through the chat stream. I saw them. But if you could repost them in the Q&A window, I would be happy to address them there as well. Kimberly asked, based on the last poll, the poll about the audiences, is there a proven track for the other we should focus on for audiences? Is there a proven track for the other we should focus on for audiences? Order. Thanks, Kimberly. Is there a proven track for the order we should focus on for audiences? You know, there are reasons why companies would start, you know, in various ways. So is there a proven order? No. I think what we saw with the study, the research, one of the reasons we kind of sliced the data by those three separate audiences groups is that they have separate needs, right? And so I think there isn't an order, but rather kind of, I think the critical component is identifying the critical skills for each of those audiences and then determining what it is that will drive the greatest success at scale in your business at that time. For example, again, your individuals are your biggest audience. That provides power, but it also, depending on how your organization works, might be a constraint. What do I mean by that? If you're an office-based culture, you're limited by space, right? You can't just have massive megaphone conversations with people. That's not effective. So you have to think about things like conference room availability and executive time, and right, you've got some constraints in order to be able to reach the individuals. But that's going to be your biggest scale, right? Your executives, again, executives have to identify and drive the change, but you're often limited by, you know, their availability, their other competing demands for their time. And then the managers, again, depending on your culture, it may be easy, it may be hard to get all of your managers kind of on the same page, just based on the functions that they're running, based on geography in some cases. So that was a long way to say there isn't a proven order. I think it's about just being clear on your organizational needs and understanding that each of those audiences is also going to have different needs. And so as you think about what's best for them, driving into those, you know, 3 or 4 critical skills for them, and then using to your benefit the your organizational culture to drive maximum effort. I think the key is this isn't an overnight, nor is it a once and done effort. It's something that needs to drive over time. Whew, that was a long answer. Kimberly, it was a great question. Thank you for asking it. I don't see any more. Will the slides be available? We're going to provide the recording as well as a link to the study on which all of the slide information came from. So you'll have that resource available to you. Let me see if I can open up my chat window and find any of the questions that came through there. Otherwise, I think we've got just maybe time for one more question. If anybody has a burning question that they want to post in the Q&A window, I'm happy to take that. Otherwise, we've got one from Eric. Can you touch a bit more on belonging, specifically in terms of skills? Ooh, deep topic, right? Here's what I will say, Eric. So, there's lots of research, there's lots of articles, lots of dialogue right now about the B in the DEIB kind of equation, if you will. So there's lots of dialogue about it belonging, and so I would encourage you to find some of that as well. The skills for belonging. The other thing I will say is, again, when you're identifying the skills that will drive a belonging culture or belonging in your culture, make them action-oriented, right? So it's not about listening as a passive skill as much as it is about, active engagement in conversation. That, again, that's maybe an easy example, but the difference being, when we talk about does someone feel like they belong in an organization, it's those action-oriented skills that are really going to drive that, as opposed to kind of the impact of a passive skill. One more, Marcy. I think we've got time. How do you explain to leaders how to integrate DEI into their businesses? Right. So it has to start, you have to think about it from the culture, right? So, you know this as HR executives, right? You can't kind of drastically change what currently exists inside your organization and expect it to work well. Same is true for DEI, right? If there's not a kind of foundation of the elements we talked about, I see if I can get there to the slide quickly. If there's not a foundation of decency and accountability, of norms and practices that support and drive positive change related to DEI, then you can't go big with your solution, right? You have to start by examining norms and practices and decency and accountability, that foundational level, so that you can build upon it in order to drive change. So, from how do you explain it to leaders? It's really examining where they are, talking to them about the skills that will be successful for them to drive change. But then understanding that, every person you're going to have a different type of conversation with every person just based on where they are in their personal journey and their personal kind of mission related to driving DE&IB within your company. That brings us right to the top of the hour. Thank you for being so engaged in this conversation. And for letting me share some ideas with you. I wish you all the best success as you drive positive change within your businesses.